I could tell you stories behind stories, if you know what I mean, but you won't have time for that, so. Right, my father was from Tramore. His name was Terry Colbert. He worked on the railways, and we originally lived in Johns Park. When I was about 5, we moved into Rice Park in the city centre, and he carried on working in the railways. My mother was more of a housewife, really.
What was her name?
Alice McAvoy.
And was she, her family from Waterford?
They were, yeah. More so, kind of think, Portlaoise direction way back. But the funny thing was, it's not that funny, but when I was born in 1959, my grandparents on both sides were already deceased. So we never knew much family. And both sides of the family, a lot of people had emigrated. So I never had many aunts or uncles. I think even when I made me communion and confirmation, there was maybe a half dozen people at it, because everyone was gone away, like. So it was always just ourselves, really.
And you said your father was on the railway in Tramore. Have you no memory of that?
I wouldn't have any memory as such, but I'd heard stories and I saw photographs. At one stage, my father, his father, and my father's grandfather, all three of them, were working together on the railway in Tramore. And after that shut down, he was moved over to Sally Park, and he worked more in the goods office over there. So I'm not sure what exactly he handled, but every week he came home with a bunch of comics. So I was brought up reading comics and stuff, so I've always been a good reader from an early age. So.
And at that stage, was Tramore Railway part of CIE then?
I'm not too sure. As I said, I think it finished around about 1960, 61, 62. I was born late 59, so I've no memories of it whatsoever, just the stories I was told about it. And I think an awful lot of people regret that it ever got taken up. Basically, they caught people on the hop one Christmas. Straight after Christmas, they shut it down and started taking up the tracks straight away before any campaign or anything could start to stop them. And I'm sure years later it would have been a fantastic tourist thing. But back in those days, it was all about development. So they weren't really thinking about tourists or how the future was going to judge them. It was a case of get that up out of the way and let's build a better road and let's run buses, because buses are cheaper to run than trains at the time. And that was their thinking. They thought it was all progress.
An awful shame.
Awful shame, yeah.
Okay, Mark, so what I want to talk to you about is your involvement in the entertainments, the music stuff and all that.
Right.
And I know you started off with WRTC at the time.
Yeah, it was WRTC, Waterford Regional Technical College. I was a student out there. When I was a student there was only about 800 students. And there was a full-time president. The rest were volunteers from the student body. And there was a girl, Margaret Bowett, being previous president. And I had no intentions of getting involved in anything like that. I had no interest in politics or anything. But the elections were usually held in February, and then the president would take over at the end of that college year, which would be about May. And I got on fairly well with most people in the college. So somehow I found myself getting elected student union president, going into the college year 79-80. And as part of the job, it involved booking bands and discos, which back then we used to run in the canteen in the college, which held about 400 people. It might be hard for people to realise this, but there was no nightclubs or anything in Waterford at that time. I think the Ardree Hotel was the main hotel, and we were able to get that once a year for the college rag ball, and that's because it was for charity. So there was no nightclub to run a student disco. So as a part of the job was every Thursday night we would have something in the canteen, and the reason it was a Thursday night was an awful lot of students weren't from Waterford City, they were from surrounding areas, and they would be getting the bus back to Wexford or Carlow or wherever on a Friday. So it was kind of okay to stay out late on a Thursday night, stagger into a few classes Friday morning, knock off early, get the bus home. That was the routine. So as part of all that, I would have bands approach me about doing gigs. Not local bands, but bands on tour. And so that was very enjoyable. And then one of the bands I was offered was U2. So back, I think it was February 29th, 1980, because it was a leap year, we actually had U2 in the college. And a lot of students gave out to me because I think it used to be 60 pence for a disco, but we put the price up to 80 pence to cover the band. And we had to shove a load of tables together to make the stage. And if I had £1 for every person that claims to be at that gig, I'd be very rich. Because we had 400 tickets sold, and the ceiling was very low, the condensation was enormous, everyone was in a sweat, it was like a sauna, so people were constantly opening up windows, but there was no security. There was only me and a few students. And we were constantly going around shutting the windows to stop people trying to sneak in free. And then people would open the window again. So I had a nightmare of a night. I didn't enjoy the gig, but we broke even, which was the whole point of running gigs with the Students' Union. It wasn't to make money, it was to provide entertainment and break even. And I also remember afterwards down in the office, Paul McGuinness was the U2 manager. He came down to me in the office, and the fee was £300 at the time. And he said, is there any chance you give me £25 for a support band, who were a band called The Shade from Cork, and I'll look after you the next time we're around on the next gig. So I did, because we wanted to get him back. And I remember walking back into town that night, and at the, can't remember the place, one of the traffic lights, a big van pulled up, and Bono was sitting up front with one of the other lads in the band and someone else. And before the lads left, I'd given them a load of jam tarts from the college canteen. I remember pulling down the window, hey Martin, any chance of more jam tarts? That was my claim to fame, having a conversation with Bono years later when people asked me. So that's how that gig happened. And then when I finished being the Student Union president that year, I obviously went to work. And within 2 years, the Bridge Hotel had reopened. They had renovated the place and they were going to have a nightclub in it. And I went along to Tom Tracy at the time and I said, look, how would you feel about a student disco? And he said to me, look, Thursday nights, I'm going to be doing bands on Thursday nights, there's no way you could. And I said, look, you're not doing that on a Wednesday, and I think I could make things happen to get students to come out on a Wednesday instead of a Thursday. He said, if you can do that, we'll do a deal. So I went back to whoever was the Student Union president at the time, and I said, look, how much did you make off entertainment last year running gigs in the canteen? And I said, well, nothing, we kind of lost money. So I said, right, if you allow me to take over running the entertainments, I will guarantee you money. And I agreed a fee with them, so they had to do nothing, absolutely nothing. Just allow me to go out and put posters and advertise the gig on a Wednesday night in the college. So I went out on the basis of break up your week with a bit of entertainment at the Bridge Hotel. A midweek kind of break was the whole vibe. So anyway, the very first night I ran it, I had about 600 students at £2 a head, and it just flew from there. And after a while, I said I'll run a competition and put a name on it. And if I don't like the name they enter, I'm going to call it Jaggers, because Mick Jagger was really popular at the time, still is, funnily enough. But someone came up with the name Scholars, and that seemed to stick. And so I started doing regular discos, and then I'd charge a little bit more to put a band on, because I was really just into putting on bands. And sometimes I actually lost money on the bands, but I was just into putting on bands. And now and again, I would take a night off Tom Tracy, maybe a different night, maybe a Tuesday night, and I'd put on a different band myself. And sometimes I made money. I think one of the first bands I put on was Foster and Allen, that I had no interest in. I just wanted to run a gig, and I made money on it, just about. And I was hooked from there on. I just wanted to run gigs. So I ended up giving up my full-time job where I was and putting on gigs in the Bridge Hotel. And sometimes I lost and sometimes I made, but I did okay out of it. And then eventually they asked me to work full-time for them, run the entertainments. And that was grand. So everything was okay, and then after a couple of years, I had this idea for a festival. I've always wanted to do an outdoor festival. And at the time, the biggest agents in the country were MCD. And the MC was McCann, and the D was Dennis Desmond. And I went to see Dennis Desmond in Dublin, and I pitched this idea to him of a kind of a festival-type gig where people would come not just for the band, but for the venue and the vibe of the gig. So it wasn't like Slane at the time where you depend on a band to draw the people. This would be, if people got into it, they'd come for that. Now, you still have a good lineup of bands, but it would be kind of good value for money, a lot of good, half-decent bands. And he said, yeah, he'd be interested. So as part of that conversation, he was bringing in a band called the Waterboys in to do gigs in Dublin and Cork. And I said, any chance I'd get them for Waterford? So he said, I don't think so, you wouldn't get the numbers. I said, look, just give me a decent deal that I have a chance here. So he gave me a deal that involved needing 400 people to break even. And the problem was, it was going to be the Wednesday night after an Easter weekend, which normally would be a disaster because everyone has spent the money over the Easter. Plus the students would have been on 2 weeks holidays. I wouldn't be able to tap into the student market to promote it. And the students would literally be back in college on a Tuesday, and I'd be putting on the gig on the Wednesday, and I had to try and get 400 people. So I linked in with ABC Radio, and a lot of people didn't know the Waterboys. They knew the song The Whole of the Moon, but they didn't kind of know the rest of them. So I did a deal with ABC Radio that for 2 weeks solid, on every DJ's programme, which would normally be every 3 hours, they would play The Whole of the Moon plus one other song off the Waterboys album. So after 2 weeks, people kind of got to know, brainwashed people, they got to know the Waterboys. And whereas the most I'd ever charged before was £3 for a gig, this particular gig I had to go for £4. And I needed 400 people to break even. And if I didn't get that, I was at a loss. But the problem I had with Dennis Desmond was the deal was, if money was made, most of it went to them. About 70% was going to Dennis Desmond. And I couldn't sell tickets in advance. So lo and behold, on the night, I also remember he was sitting in a restaurant with a guy called BP Fallon, famous DJ at the time, and they were in having a meal, and the doors opened, and we started getting in people, and I'd pop in every half hour and tell him how many was there. And basically, by the time the Waterboys went on stage, I had 1,100 people in the place.
This is Buck Community Centre, is it?
No, this is the Bridge Hotel. This is in the Bridge Hotel. So that was the Waterboys, and because that went so well, the next day we went for a spin, looking for a venue for this festival I had in mind. And we went out to Tramore Racecourse, and I thought I could come up with the right kind of scenario there. And Dennis came up with this thing, we'll call it A Day at the Races. It was the title of an old Queen album. But when push came to shove, I couldn't do a deal with the racecourse. And a year later, or maybe a year or two later, Dennis took the same idea and it became Féile in Thurles. And the idea with Féile was a load of particularly local bands, some English up-and-coming bands, and people went because it was Féile, not because of who was headlining. And it was all the exact same kind of stuff I had presented to him originally. But in the meantime, we were doing the odd few bands. I think shortly after the Waterboys, he gave me Mary Coughlin, so I had her for the first time. And then a few months later, he gave me a choice. He said, I have 2 acts coming in. One is Her Jones, and one is Swing Out Sister. And Swing Out Sister just had a massive hit. And Her Jones hadn't had a hit for maybe 12 months, which normally isn't good. And I said, I think I'd rather have Her Jones. So the basis of that gig was I needed to charge £6. And the Bridge Hotel was too small. And the people in the Bridge Hotel weren't too happy with me because they thought I'd do all their gigs there. So I went and got the Butler Centre, the Butler Community Centre in Johns Park. And the day of the gig, again, it was the stress that was involved was enormous. This time I sold tickets in advance. I managed to sell 1,100 tickets in advance, but I needed 1,200 to break even. So I put enormous pressure on myself to get 1,200 people, but I just felt I could do it. So after selling 1,100 tickets in advance, I had a little caravan parked outside to sell tickets for walk-ups. And I was thinking, I'll surely get another 300 people. This will be great. But on the day, the stage wasn't big enough out there. And I had to go out to the college and beg for these small risers that they used to have out there to make stages. And there was a guy doing a delivery, and I remember having to give him £50, which was a lot of money at the time, to load up all these risers, bring them out, and then I had to go in and load them all up. Back then we didn't have humpers, so I was doing a lot of this myself, load them all up and extend the stage. And afterwards I don't even remember how I managed to get the stuff back. But anyway, that was £50. Cut a long story short, almost nobody paid on the night, and I lost £600. And at the time, that £600 would get you like a 2-week holiday somewhere. And like I was a mini hero for bringing a band like that to Waterford, but I had actually lost money. And what made it worse was, you mentioned the Butler Community Centre and the Waterboys. The Waterboys came back to Waterford later and went to the community centre, and I wasn't involved in the gig. And that kind of hurt me. And I won't say myself and Dennis fell out, but things were a bit tense after that. And after that, I just made sure I took acts that I knew I could maybe make some money on. But that didn't always work out. I mean, I've lost money on loads of gigs, but I've also had gigs where I've made a lot of money. But in the Bridge Hotel, we ended up doing a lot of other shows like Smokey, with Leo Sayer. I had a cutting crew. On a bank holiday Monday night, 31st of October, Halloween night, which turned out to be my birthday. And again, the people in the Bridge Hotel said, "You're mad. We never get anybody on a bank holiday Monday." Usually what they used to do on a Sunday night was you'd be at the Sunday night disco and they'd give them a half-price ticket for the following night, just to try and get a few in. And I said, "No, I think I can get it. I can do this." So I promoted again using the radio, posters. You didn't have like social media back then for advertising stuff, so a lot of it was word of mouth. And then I actually got 1,000 people that night, and I made good money that night. I made enough money that night that I put it away. I was doing up my house, and I put the money away to get a new fitted kitchen. And you know how much fitted kitchens are. That's how much I made that night. But 3 months later, Chrissy Dignam had fallen out with Aslan at the time. They sacked him because of a drug issue. And he was having a comeback solo tour. And I thought, yeah, I can get a crowd for him on a Tuesday night in Waterford. And all the money I'd made on the Cutting Brew, I lost on Chrissy Dignam. So, like I said, swings and roundabouts. Sometimes you made good, sometimes you lost good. Tough business, yeah. And then another gig that Dennis offered me was Def Leppard. Def Leppard, his drummer had a car accident and lost his arm. So the vibe was that, well, he's going to be finished. But he wanted to make a comeback. And they discovered that he could do a lot of stuff with his feet. So their plan was they were going to play at Donington, which is a massive heavy metal festival. They were going to be playing there on a Saturday night. And the previous Monday, they were going to do what we were going to call a live rehearsal gig. And I had the rights to this gig. And he was going to have another drummer with him. And this was, I think Rick Allen was the guy's name, if I'm not mistaken. This was going to be his first ever gig with Def Leppard after the accident. And it was going to be in the Bridge Hotel. But then the Bridge Hotel got nervous and they said, oh, this is going to be way too loud, too much hassle. At the last minute, I had to move the gig to Katie Riley's Kitchen, which is halfway between Waterford and Tramore. And so basically they came out and took over the whole place. I was able to sell tickets in advance. The problem was I couldn't sell the ticket for any more than £4 at the time because they didn't want to be seen to rip off people for what was a live rehearsal, not a proper gig. And so I was limited to £4. And that was fair enough. But I needed to get people out to Katie Riley's. So I did a gig that included a bus ticket for a £5. Now the bus was costing me £60. I only had 200 people going to the gig, but I was getting an extra £200, paying out 60 for the bus. So I had 140 to play with. And I said, great, I'm just going to make a few bob from the effort. So the gig went ahead. Dennis Desmond arrived. What's this? I see people getting off a bus. What's the story there? Yeah, Dennis, blah, blah, blah. We told you you're going to charge £4. Yeah, but the bus, no, £4. You have to go around and give back everyone a pound. I actually had to go around in the hall. There were some people who put their hand up who I knew hadn't even been on the bus that I had to give back a pound to. And it was either that or fall out with MCD and lose the chance of getting in more bands. So I actually lost money. Now, I actually made a few bob more from other people that came in late, but basically I always remember at the end of that gig, one of the things I had to give Def Leppard was a bottle of Jack Daniels. And I had to borrow a bottle of Jack Daniels off the guy behind the bar in Katie Riley's. And the next day, I had to buy a bottle of Jack Daniels and give it back to him. And what I lost running that gig was the cost of that bottle of Jack Daniels. So it actually cost me money to have Def Leppard. And years later, I remember telling my son about this gig, and he said, there's no way you had Def Leppard. I said, honestly, he said, the band, they sold millions, tens of millions of albums. You had Def Leppard out in Katie Riley's kitchen, and it was £4 in. Nah, don't believe you. He actually had to look it up online, and eventually he found something that proves it. And what I didn't even remember at the time was, only when he looked it up, that it was the following Saturday, they headline at Castle Donington. You couldn't do that now. You just couldn't do it. So anyway, like I said, I was hooked doing gigs, so I was doing gigs for years afterwards then.
And then when did you make the move then to the Roxy?
What happened was, I was working away in the Bridge Hotel. At this time, I was kind of on a wage to run gigs in the Bridge Hotel. I could still have a Tuesday night and run my own gigs. Sometimes I made money, sometimes I didn't. I'll tell you one quick funny story. Band of Stunning. We used to book them for the Bridge Hotel at £2,000 at the time. And I remember ringing them up once and I said, hey, any chance you do a Monday night for me? They said, no way, you won't get a crowd on a Monday. I said, just give me a good deal for a Monday. They said, look, we'll do it for £1,500. So I went back to the lads in the hotel and I said, look, there's a particular Monday night. Can I have that to put on the Stunning myself? I think I could do something with it. And they looked at me, you stupid or what? I said, look, can I have it? Can I do it? Yeah, you can do it. So I booked the band in for this particular Monday, and it was Monday the 16th of March, which might mean a lot to people. But a week before the gig, Paurie Bourne, the Stunning manager, rang me up and he said, you so-and-so. I said, what do you mean? You're after booking the night before St. Patrick's Day. Everybody's off the next day. You're going to clean up that night. I want my original £2,000. I said, no, we have a deal contract signed, £1,500. I won't tell you how much money I made that night, but I made more than the band. So that was just one kind of, I won't call it a stroke, but you had to keep your eye out for opportunities. So anyway, cut a long story short, I was under pressure with the Bridge Hotel to do the better gigs for the house, as they used to call it. And then this opportunity came up to get my hands on the Stone Court as it was, and I had been briefly Cheers, and it hadn't worked out, and I knew it was available. But I couldn't really run it in competition with the Bridge Hotel. So I had this idea to turn it into a pub. And there was a particular pub in town that I won't name because it's still going, and it was kind of the place to go to, and it was where all the heads hung out. But I thought at the time the bar staff were very condescending, and you're lucky to get served kind of an attitude. So I spoke to a mate of mine, a guy called Bruno Brown, who had previously worked in the same pub. And I said, look, I have this idea to get this place. I think it could hold about 300 people, and run it as an alternative to that place, and give people a fair deal on the price of drink, put in the odd band, and put in staff that are actually nice to people, that are glad to see people come in the door, not kind of, oh yeah, you went to get served, yeah, back to you. So, just run it right. So on December, I think it was the 16th, 1993, we were due to open up the Roxy. I had no money to do up the place, but I knew the place needed a makeover. And what happened was, I had a couple of £1,000. I borrowed a couple of thousand off my father-in-law. I went into the credit union with 5,000. Back in them days, did lend you twice. So I got 10,000. I spent 10,000 revamping the whole place, moving a small dance floor, moving where you would have a band, moving a bar. Anyway, I spent £10,000, and we opened up as the Roxy. And the idea was to run it as a pub, but do the odd bit of live music. So we opened just before Christmas. And at the last minute, one of the problems I'd had running the Bridge Hotel was insurance claims. And I was very conscious of not having accidents. And there was a delay getting our insurance. And we were due to open on the Friday night. So I had no insurance going into that weekend. But I had to open, or I wasn't going to make any money. So we did what we call a little test up on the back floor. And I spilled a glass of water to see would it soak into the timber. And because we had painted the floor, it wouldn't soak in. I said, Jesus, that's an accident waiting to happen. I said, we'll close off the back part and just go with the front. And the front area held maybe about 80 to 100 people. So we set up the band behind the curtain, facing down to this 80 to 100 people. And then I left Bruno to run it, and I went down to work in the Bridge Hotel. And I came back afterwards, and I said, well, how did we do? He said, the band went well, we had a big crowd, a lot of people came and went, and we counted up our takings. Somehow or other, 400 different people had come into the place. Had paid in, watched some of the band, had gone, other people came. So in a space that didn't hold any more than 100, on our opening night, 400 people actually paid in. Don't ask me how it happened.
They probably just came on to check it out.
Yeah, that was all. So the following night, I said, feck it, we're getting 400 people, God, on a Friday. What's going to come on a Saturday? So I said, right, we'll take a chance. I'll get some extra staff in, and we'll just keep an eye on things and make sure nothing goes wrong, like. Because the insurance wasn't going to kick in till Monday. I think we had about 600 on the Saturday and then a small crowd on the Sunday. Now, it was near Christmas, so we were going to get numbers anyway. So the plan then after Christmas was we'd settle down and run it as a pub, and if anything, we'd get people going there and then they'd go down to the Bridge Hotel. So I wasn't really getting any grief off the people in the Bridge Hotel. But I wanted to run the odd gig. And straight after Christmas, I got this mad notion, I'm going to go over to London and see what I can find. I remember seeing Time Out magazine, and there's listings of gigs and things that were on. And there's a guy called Glenn Tilbrook who used to play in Squeeze. And I saw him listed for this pub. And I said, I didn't realise people like that played pub gigs. So he was playing in the pub to about 200 people. I said, sure, our place can hold that. So I got in touch with MCD, and I said, hey, can you get Glenn Tilbrook to come over? Who's Glenn Tilbrook? I said, he sings with Squeeze. Squeeze, they're not around anymore, you can't get them. Okay, fair enough. Look, if you ever get a chance, I'd be interested in doing something. So a few months later, I got a call from the guy in MCD that I used to do business with, and he said, I've got a choice for you. There's an Easter weekend coming up, he said, and I've got 2 acts, and you won't believe it. One of them is Glenn Tilbrook, or there's a fellow called David Gray. I said, who's David Gray? Now, everyone now knows who David Gray is. So I said, I'd rather have Glenn Tilbrook. So I came back to Bruno and I said, look, here's the thing. Glenn Tilbrook is coming in that weekend. He's playing somewhere else on the Sunday night. But I have this idea. Again, I kept getting these ideas. I said, how about an Easter Sunday afternoon with Glen Tilbrook? We'll just charge him £2. And we'll try and get a couple of hundred people. And we had a band called the Jam Tarts booked for that night. So the idea was get in people for this gig, clear the place, quick clean, and go again that night. So he was pretty doubtful about it, but I was a big Squeeze fan. So as far as I was concerned, if I'm a Squeeze fan, I can convert everyone else into being a Squeeze fan. So anyway, look, we got 300 people in that afternoon, on Easter Sunday afternoon, for £2 a head. And again, if I had money for everyone ever claimed to be at that gig, I'd be very rich. And so that gig went really well. And afterwards, I was always sorry I didn't get in David Gray because he became a megastar. And we got in Glen Tilbrook again a couple of times. But just even doing that gig, it just gave me a sense of all the possibilities you could do with gigs and getting people out at different times. It doesn't have to be a nighttime gig. The only problem was we ended up herding people out to get it cleaned up and ready again for that night. And myself and Bruno at the time had a bit of an argument because I felt we shouldn't be herding people out. We need to keep these people. So after that, we kind of said, look, let's just stick to what works and keep things simple. But the place didn't go as well as I wanted then, and I ran into a lot of difficulties. And at this stage, my neck was on the line, and I had to make it work. So unfortunately, myself and Bruno kind of parted ways, and I wanted to get more into doing some discos and stuff that would get in people. I knew it might hurt my situation with the Bridge Hotel, but I needed to pay back the bank and the credit union loans and different things. And I started looking out for other ways of getting people into venues. And then the dance scene came along. And for a few months there, on Saturday night, we would have 400 or 500 people in for a celebrity DJ in from England. That was costing more money than what I used to pay out for bands. And I wasn't too familiar with this kind of scene at all. But it was bringing in people. So the first kind of dance scene, it was called Can't Stop. And there was a local music promoter, Dan was his name, used to bring those DJs. And we kind of gave him the Saturday night to run. And it went really well, and we kind of did okay, but those people didn't really drink. And even though we were doing the numbers, and I was kind of making money, I just didn't feel comfortable. There was a kind of a drug element to it. And then I was only leasing the venue, and I had an option to buy it. And I had to take up the option to buy it. And the only way I could do that was go to my bank manager and say, look, here's my takings. And I went to him saying, hey, look, I've got fantastic takings. I'm there a year now. Give me the money to buy the place. And he said to me, Martin, I have to tell you, there's terrible talk around about the place and drugs and this kind of scene you have going. And it was like a kick in the teeth. And I said, oh, sugar. I said, look, I can't afford to lose this. Everything is on the line here. I've got to make this happen. What can I do? He said, if you can get rid of that scene and carry on, even for get me 6 months more figures, without that kind of a scene, I'll get you the money. And I said, how am I going to do this? So basically, there was a good local band on the scene at the time called Hot in Question. So within a couple of weeks, I actually totally scrapped the dance scene. That was bringing in 500 and 600 people on a Saturday night. And a week later, I put in Hot in Question, who would attract a totally different audience, older people, more settled, but drinkers. And I think I got about 180 people in. But it was a much cleaner operation. So I put them in for a 4-week run. And each week it grew and grew and grew, till we had about 300 on a Saturday night. But I knew I couldn't keep Hot in Question on every Saturday night. I'd flog it to death. So then I said, right, you know what we'll do? I'll run a Battle of the Bands competition. And I'll give local bands an opportunity. And we'll put them on early and try and get people in early. And then when there's a crowd in, hopefully we get more people to come in later on for a disco. And that worked. And 6 months later, I had 500 people every Saturday night. A whole different 500 people than what we used to have for the dance scene. And I was able to go back to the bank and they gave me the money to buy the place. And then I started doing bands on Tuesday nights. I'd get people like Eleanor McAvoy and Mary Coughlin, people that you couldn't afford to get in a weekend, but they wouldn't be renting on a Tuesday night. And that kind of helped bring in things as well. And I also remember I had Don Baker one Tuesday night. And there was a guy doing the sound and stuff for me, a fellow called Peter Fitzgerald. Fantastic DJ, the most underrated DJ in Waterford. Peter could do the sound, he could do anything. He could do electricity, all kinds of stuff. And I said to Peter one day at 6 o'clock, we were due to open the doors at 8. And I said, Peter, I've got a space over there and I think I'm going to have a big crowd. If only I could get rid of that area there, knock a door out there, make a bit more space. He said, well, look, at 6 o'clock now, if we get stuck in, we can have it ready. And we got stuck in and we cleared the store area that freed up space for another 20 people. And I always kind of said, well, I love people that can do attitude. So Peter was my go-to guy from then on. Anytime something had to be done, I'd go to Peter. Or if I was stuck for anything, Peter was the man. And then later on, we got in this DJ on a Thursday night. And this guy now won't say any names, but everyone thinks back to the Roxy and they remember this particular DJ. But what happened was on the Thursday night, that wasn't going too well on Thursdays. I think we were struggling to get about 60, 70 people. Sorry. Anyway, we're struggling on a Thursday night to get 60 or 70 people with this DJ that a lot of people knew. Kind of a head. Playing a lot of heads music, you know, obscure Smith songs and stuff people didn't really know, but it was kind of cool to play it. But I wasn't getting people in the door. So I said, Peter, what am I going to do? And I couldn't put Peter in as a DJ because he was doing other stuff. So myself and Peter had a chat with the chap. And Peter came up with a list of music that he should play alongside the stuff he was doing. Just kind of mix it a bit more and make it a bit more commercial. So literally we gave this chap a list of stuff he should be playing and he started doing that and the numbers went up and up and up. And then we were doing a regular 200, 250 on a Thursday, which we were very happy with. And everyone thought this DJ is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. He made his name from it. He still does the odd bit of stuff, I think. And people think, yeah, I remember him, he was brilliant. What people don't realise was he wouldn't have lasted a month only for Peter came along and said, this is what you should be playing. So anyway, the Roxy.
Just go back to the dance scene you were talking about.
Yeah.
Did they move to the Metroland?
They did, yeah. The funny thing was, I don't mean this in a bad way. At the time when we'd done that, Bruno wasn't into it, and he said, I've got too much integrity now to get involved in this scene, I'm more into live bands. And I remember saying to Bruno at the time, Bruno, integrity don't pay the bills, I have to pay the bills, I have to do whatever it takes to pay the bills. So we kind of fell out. I went on and did the dance scene for so long. The minute I stopped doing the dance scene in the Roxy, Dano was going to move to the Metroland. And who did he join up with? Bruno, which was so ironic. But anyway, good luck to them. I wished them the best and I said, lads, you carry on, do your thing, because I'm going to be doing something different. So you do well, do well.
Isn't it funny that the bank manager kind of said this to you about the drugs?
Yeah.
It's a funny one that in a way he was the moral kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose...
He was probably looking after you.
He was looking after me in a sense, and the same bank manager always did look after me in other ways. He actually did me a favour, because if he'd just given me the money and we carried on, I think we would have flogged it to death. We would have got a bad name as a venue. We wouldn't have got the people in for the other kind of gigs that I wanted to be doing. And I don't know how long it would have lasted, but he actually did me a favour. He kind of put me back on the right track. My problem at the time was I wasn't a barman. I never pulled a point in my life at the time. I just saw myself as a promoter. I would have stayed in the Roxy if I had gone in working properly, pulling points and serving people. But I never saw myself as a barman. I felt I didn't have the personality for it. And we had some great staff at the time. We had a guy, Davy Flynn, we had Laura Purcell, we had Phil Burke, we had some brilliant staff, people who I felt could do that job better than I could. We had great doormen, some of the lads from the Freewheelers were the doormen, good DJs and good people. And for a few years there was a fantastic vibe there. When people came, we kept our prices, we weren't in disco prices, we kept our prices pegged at pub prices. And we tried to just give value for money and look after people. And it was great for a few years. And then unfortunately, coming into 97, the government made it known that they were going to extend the pub hours on weekends. And they decided that instead of like 11 o'clock or half 11 closing, the pubs would close at half 12 or 1 o'clock on Thursday, Friday and Saturday. Now the Thursday didn't last long, but to this day we still have the Friday and Saturday. And I kind of felt, well, who's going to leave a pub at 12, half 12 and pay into a kind of a nightclub situation? Or how am I going to get people to come in at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock into my place and pay in a cover charge to see a band or a disco when they can stay in the pub at 1 o'clock? I said, this is, the writing is on the wall here. I better get out of this scene. So I had to call a meeting of all the staff. I wanted the staff to know first. I said, look, I'm putting the place up for sale. And I went to auction. And back then, a place should sell pound for pound. If you're doing $500,000 turnover, the place should sell for $500,000. And I was doing a good turnover. And I put it up for auction thinking I would get maybe $500,000 and that was a fortune back then. But I didn't sell at the auction, and the feedback I got from people was, Martin, you're too closely associated with it. Other people don't think if they went in, they would run it as well and get the numbers. And they're not familiar enough with the scene. You know how to get the bands and how to do X, Y, and Z. They don't, so they don't think they could make the same money that you're making. But I still wanted to get out, because I feel the longer I stay here now, once the pubs start opening late, I'm going to, lose everything. So I did find a guy who bought it in the end, and he didn't last too long. And my plan was to turn around and buy a pub and run a proper pub business. And straight away, at that time, 97, 98, the price of pubs in Waterford shot up, absolutely shot up. And I couldn't afford to buy a pub. And for about 18 months, I was living off the money I made from selling the Roxy, after paying back the bank, of course. And I felt, I've got to do something. What am I going to do? I can't afford a place in Waterford. I have to find something to make a living. So I went off and bought a rundown hotel in Tipperary town that was shut down for 7 years. And they didn't have a Saturday night disco. So I said, all right, I'll open up a Saturday night disco and I'll make me money. And somehow or other, we did okay for a couple of years, but I didn't really enjoy it, and it was too far from Waterford. Then I bought a pub in Carrick. Then I managed to buy a pub in Waterford. Before I knew it, I owned 2 pubs in Waterford and a pub in Carrick. And I was into property more so than being a publican, which was the worst mistake I ever made. And I became more Republican and less into music. So we're probably getting off our music entertainment scene this stage, but that's just how I came to be in it and how I came to be out of it.
Okay, and why did you study in WRTC?
The funny thing about that was I had never done bookkeeping or commerce in school. But when I went into the college, the first year I went in to do computer programming, because I was intelligent. I thought, yeah, I could do computer programming. That's the next big thing. And I couldn't take to it at all. And I got a job in the post office as a post office clerk. I got moved to Galway, and I didn't last. I couldn't handle it. So that July I left. I came back to the college. I said, I'll do a course in the college, and this time I'll do accountancy. Accountancy is where the money is. And I'd never done bookkeeping or anything before. So I went into do an accountancy course with no background in accountancy. But somehow I actually got through the first year, and I had 1 year done in cost of management accountancy, which I found very interesting. And that's when I got elected student union president. So that was going to be full time. So I said, I'll just put my studies on hold and I'll come back to it after a year. But the other thing I had been doing at that time was I used to volunteer to visit the local mental hospital and visit a lot of patients there. And I found it very satisfactory and worthwhile. And I applied for a job as a psychiatric nurse. So the week before, maybe 2 weeks before, the college was starting up with me as a full-time student union president, I got accepted as a trainee psychiatric nurse. And I suddenly had a big decision to make. Do I give up this thing with the college before I even started and go off and be a psychiatric nurse? Or do I stick this out? And I remember having a conversation with one of the lecturers out there, a guy called Victor Merriman, whose son is Lee Merriman, a very well-known Waterford entertainer. And Victor just gave me a bit of advice. I can't remember the exact word now, but basically it was kind of go with your heart and stick with it. And if the college thing doesn't work out, maybe the nursing will always be there. And I kind of felt obliged to go with the college thing as well. So I said, right, okay, I'm going to stick at this and do it, and then we'll see what happens with the nursing. But obviously once I got involved with the college scene, and as a part of that was running bands, I kind of got hooked on entertainment. And by the time I gave up the college at the end of the year, instead of going back into nursing, I ended up doing another job altogether, which kind of gave me the free time to promote gigs. So it was always a case of adapting, and that's the one thing I found, you always had to adapt, make the best of the situation you're in, and kind of go with the flow as it were, and look for the opportunity to how to make the best of the situation. So that's the way I've always been with it, you know. Never really in the gig thing to make a fortune, just to try and make a living out of it. And mind you, if I'd gotten in properly with MCD and had been part of FAIL and stuff at the time, and I've always since wanted to be involved in outdoor gigs. And I remember when the lads started doing Day Tripper here, I'd love to be involved in that, but just wasn't to be. And then the costs involved now, it's crazy. You couldn't do it on your own anyway. But
And now you're a publican.
publican now, yeah. And I serve pints and I serve people. And I don't think I would have been able to do that 25 years ago. I just didn't really, I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, as it were, to be behind the counter and talk to people. And, I was more of a planner. Whereas now, I enjoy what I'm doing. And it was only when COVID hit, this term hospitality became a trendy word. And I actually realised in the last couple of years that we are part of the hospitality trade. And that means looking after your regulars and other people and making them people feel they're glad they came in and looking after them as best you can. And I kind of see what we do now as a service. And again, I don't think I'll ever make a fortune out of it. But as long as I make a living and I can look after my family, I'll be happy.
You're probably applying for mental health with some of your customers.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, to be honest. Like I said, I kind of drifted away from that. I used to have a bit of time, and I met a few girl students when I was a student in the college who were doing this visiting in the mental hospital. I can't think of the name of it. St. Patrick's. No, St. Patrick's, yeah. Waterford, St. Waterford's. And often on a Sunday morning we'd go up there and we'd get cups of tea for patients and have a chat with these people. And I enjoyed that for 12 months, and I thought, that's my future. But it just wasn't to be, and I've never regretted it.
No, but a lot of people will go into pubs in the sense of loneliness.
Oh yeah. Well, I found that, especially in COVID, unfortunately, we lost a couple of people in COVID. We had one or two people who died accidentally, and we had one or two, unfortunately, people who may have taken their own lives. And that was loneliness. And I remember one particular chap saying to me, if the pubs had been open and my brother had been able to go in there, he'd still be alive today. And especially when someone does come into the pub, I do a lot of the day trade myself, and especially if someone comes in their own, I always feel like you have to make some effort to say hello and start a conversation. And if they don't want to talk, fine, leave them be. But give them an opportunity that they may just want to have a chat with somebody, whoever it is. It's not as if they're going to sit there and tell you their troubles, and you probably don't have time to listen to it anyway, but you just want to give them a friendly face and just make them feel someone's actually interested in them, rather than, oh, you want a pint? Yeah, here you go, thanks, I'm off now.
And I know too, you're very much involved with Waterford soccer team.
Yeah, I was always into soccer, and then for years, and I used to go to Kilcone with my mates, and I used to sell programmes to make the money to go into the game. And back then, we'd sell loads of programmes, we'd have enough money to get a Mars bar and an apple and get into the match. And then for years, when I got involved in the music scene, I didn't have time to go to the matches. And then suddenly in 2004, at this stage I'm in Norris's bar and I'm running the pub and I'm looking for every angle to get a crowd in. The Waterford supporters were having these meetings because they were complaining about the previous manager, Jimmy McGeough, being sacked. And I said, there's an angle here now. So I went to the supporters group and I said, if you have your meetings in my pub, I'll give you a few £100 towards your fund. I just want to get them coming into the place. So they came in anyway, and I started having their meetings, and I started listening, and I said, just this is interesting, I could get involved here. And then I found out to be a director in the club and have a bit of influence, you had to print 25,000 quid at the time. I can't remember, was that punts or euros? I think it was euros. And at this stage, I had a bank, the Anglo-Irish Bank, who are now infamous for handing out money to people. And I was able to go to the Anglo-Irish Bank and say, I want 25 grand, please. What do you want it for? I want to invest it in Waterford United at the time. Why do you want to do that? Because if I invest the money in the club, I think I can get some of the fans to start coming to the pub and it'll be good for the business. Okay, here's the money. So I went off and I gave 25 grand into Waterford United at the time, and I became a director. But then you get sucked in and you start seeing things day to day and the expense involved in doing it. And before I knew it, I was putting a lot more than 25 grand in. But the funny thing was, that season, Waterford hadn't won the FA Cup since 1980, and we had a player manager, Alan Reynolds, and I said to him at the time, I think this could be our year in the Cup. And he was looking at me. So every time they had an away match, back then there was videotapes, you don't get them anymore, but I got a videotape made up of Waterford playing the Cup final in 1980 when they won it. And I insisted to Rennie that on the bus, on the away trips, you play this to the players, because it showed at the time something like 30,000 people at the final, and it showed afterwards back in Waterford City tens of thousands of people out after Waterford won the Cup. And I said, I want them to realise what this could mean to the city if we win the Cup. And I'm just convinced this could be our year. And we kept winning game after game, and we got to the final in 2004, and I was absolutely convinced that this was all part of it, that somehow I'd helped make this happen. And my wife was pregnant at the time. And so we're at the game in 2004, the final, we're playing against Longford. And there was a kind of the FEI at this time, John Delaney was involved. But they were terrible for wasting money on things. One of the things they used to waste money on was invite a few hundred people to a big fancy meal before the cup final. Now, they'd waste their money doing that, and at the same time, they put on that FAI Cup final at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon up against Man United against Arsenal. And back in Waterford, I was on the phone to someone, and apparently in all the pubs in Waterford, there wasn't a single person watching the FAI Cup final with Waterford and Longford. They were all watching Man United and Arsenal. And we had about 4,000 Waterford fans up at the game. And so anyway, we were at this fancy dinner beforehand. I said my wife was pregnant and she didn't feel well. And she kind of took a sudden attack. And I remember one particular person coming in from the FEI. And I said, I need a bit of help. I need to try and get an ambulance. And this guy looked at me as if I had two heads. And he walked away. And I found out afterwards that he said to someone, oh, I just thought they were drunk. But my wife was actually having a miscarriage just the day of the cup final. We didn't realise this at the time. So we dashed around to the hospital and she had the scans and stuff. And basically, without telling us, they kind of said, you better see your own doctor tomorrow and go to the hospital and get scans. But we knew coming out, that was that. And the cup final was kicking off in half an hour. And we said, what do we do? We had our children and family and people at the game. So we said, well, there's no option but to go to the game. So we went back to the match and we were with family and people. We're in a bad way, but we're watching this game and suddenly you get carried away with the game. And then Waterford scored one of the best goals that ever been seen. John Frost took a free kick. Darryl Murphy headed it on. And a guy called Willie Bruton took it down, lashed it home. A fantastic goal. If we'd won the cup final 1-0, people would still talk about that goal to this day. But unfortunately, Longford came back and won, and there was an incident with two balls on the pitch at the same time. It's the famous two ball on the pitch final, and we lost the game. I remember coming out of that game feeling really sick because we lost, and sick because of the probable miscarriage. And the Longford fans taunted the Waterford fans. They hadn't the sporting integrity to say, oh, unlucky. They actually taunted us for losing the game. And ever since, I've hated the Longford fans. Actually, absolutely hated them. Funny enough, we're playing this Friday night and I hope we hammer them. And they became our bogey team for a while. But unfortunately, as I said, we got confirmation the next day that we had a miscarriage. It just wasn't meant to be. So we didn't just lose the cup final, it was a bad day all around. And after that, I didn't have the stomach for staying involved, so I decided to quit. That was me, the end of it. I had to give attention to my wife and family. And while I was gone, things kind of disintegrated a bit in the club. And the previous chairman had decided to resign. And the two lads who were directors said, any chance to come back in and give us a hand for a while? I said, I'll come in for a few weeks to help you out. And the minute I came in, Jim Nolan, the playwright, was one. Brilliant guy. I wouldn't have come in only for him. And Greg Feasey, who used to have a clothes shop. I went back in to give them a hand. But Greg had kind of had enough. And it ended up just being me and Jim. Before I knew it, I was kind of acting chairman. This is 2005. I didn't even want to be involved. So suddenly I get the figures and I can see we're on the verge of going bust. I'm going to be the guy who's the chairman when this famous football club goes out of existence. What do I do? All right, I said, I'm going to ring up John Delaney. He's the main man, the FEI. So I ring up the FEI and I say, hey, we're in danger of going bust. There's no other bills here. I said, I've got money coming in from transferring Darryl Murphy to Sunderland for 100,000, but I've got about 300 grand's worth of bills. We're not getting the crowds, not getting enough people. I can't see us lasting the season. And John Delaney's secretary comes on, oh yeah, I'll explain all this to John and see what we can do, and blah, blah, blah. And they did nothing. So I said, all right, what do I do? So the next thing, I got a phone call from a guy who was the president of the club at the time. This was an honorary title. I think the same guy is still the president to this day. So I won't say his name. So he introduced me to a guy who offered to organise a friendly game with a Waterford selection against a Republic of Ireland selection. And this would make a load of money and solve all our problems. And all I had to do in return was, as the club chief honcho at the time as well, nominate this guy to be our representative on the FEI council. I said, well, that's straightforward. You're going to get us a match within 6 weeks and we'll make good for you, Bob. and you just want to be a representative on the council, because I didn't want to be on it. So it suited me to say, yeah, you want it. You go to all these meetings, whatever. I don't care. So, grand. So we tipped away. After 3 or 4 weeks, no sign of this match being organised. So we'll go back to this club president. What's happening with so-and-so and this game? Don't know, you'll have to try and contact yourself. So, cut a long story short, it was obvious the game wasn't going to happen. So I ring up the FEI, speak to John Delaney's secretary, because John Delaney won't come on the phone, and I say, so-and-so is our nominee on the FEI council, and he promised me to do X, Y and Z. He's not our representative anymore, we don't want him. And his secretary says to me, well, that would be very embarrassing for John now if you did that. I said, why, what's the matter? Well, John is about to appoint this man to be chairman of the international committee for looking after the international matches. I said, I don't care, we don't want him, he's not our nominee. The next day, this guy was announced as chairman of the international committee on a salary of 100 grand a year. Imagine that, he'd used us to get this position for 100 grand a year and hadn't put a penny back into the club. I was disgusted. Look, somehow or other we got through that season, and we actually got Pat Dolan involved. And I remember one particular game, because he'd been a previous Cork City manager, we actually took in 30 grand on the gate. And that helped save us. One of the other things I did was, we hadn't won a game in 3 months, and it was going to be Pat Dolan's first game. And we were playing Bohemians at home. We were 5-2 to win the game. Back then there wasn't a rule about betting on games. I was convinced we'd win the game, even though we hadn't won a game in 3 months. I went to bookies and I put 2,000 quid at 5-2 for us to win, because if I won that 5 grand, I could pay the wages that week. So I put the 2,000 quid on, and my wife was sitting next to me at the game. I didn't dare tell her. And it was just as the final whistle went, I said to her, is it safe enough to tell you now I had 2 grand on the game? What? So anyway, I collected the money on the Monday and paid out the wages. And that got us through that week. And then later on, that game against Cork brought in 30 grand. So somehow we staggered through to the end of the season. And all the time, this other guy who did nothing for us is suddenly on a 100 grand a year job, which I think he held for years and years and years. I wanted nothing to do with the club. I just wanted to get out then and leave it be. We managed to stay up. We were in danger of relegation. We managed to stay up. And the second last game of the season, we were playing Shamrock Rovers. And I wanted to treat the game like a cup final and bring the players up the night before and put them up. And the lad said, you're mad, we can't afford it. I said, I don't think we can afford not to, because if we go down, we're knackered. I said, what will it cost us? And I was saying to Pat Dolan, you should be on to me saying, hey, I want to bring the players up to Dublin the night before the game against Shamrock Rovers, instead of me saying to you, should we do this? I don't know, should we do it? I said, Pat, imagine, to be nice and fresh and everything. You know, focus our minds, we have to win this game. We have to stay in the Premier Division. Otherwise, I don't know what we're going to do. So it ended up going to cost about €1,500. I said, look, I'll put up the €1,500 and we'll bring them up. So anyway, Roddy Collins was the manager of Shamrock Rovers at the time. He also used to write a column in the Sunday World. So we brought the team up the night before, got my nice, easy, relaxed day, the day of the game, and we actually went behind in the game 1-0. And I always remember it was about 300 hours behind the goal. We came back and won the game 2-1, and that made us safe. And before Roddy Collins was on the pitch at the end, Shamrock Rovers, this is the class of Shamrock Rovers, they came out with an envelope to him on the pitch. He opened it. He was sacked. That's how they treated him. He was sacked on the pitch straight after the game. But he actually wrote his column the following week in the Sunday World. And he said, I knew we were in trouble that day, because when I went into the ground, I saw the Waterford players and I saw how relaxed they were. And I found out that they had stayed up the night before and had treated the game in a professional manner. And that's when I knew we were in trouble. And to me, that was like, hey, fair play to Martin. So I got me buzz out of that. It cost me 1,500 quid, but I got some buzz out of it. And we were safe. And then I got out and left it be.
I wouldn't ask you more about the soccer, because we are here all night, but just want to think about live music.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see any future for live music? You know, in a sense of like,
yeah.
Venue-wise?
I don't. The problem with back when I was in the day, you had a live gig and you had a bar and you had a venue running gigs and people get a drink. Now most of the acts, they want to play in a theatre where there's no drinking, and they want to charge crazy money for the tickets. And people don't seem to mind paying this crazy money. But I don't ever see a thing like where 300 or 400 or 500 people go in and they're sitting around and standing around and having drinks, and there's the band on stage, and it's a brilliant gig. That just doesn't seem to be there anymore. Plus the people have been brought up now on dance music and variations of house music and different kinds of stuff on YouTube. And they're seeing the best of stuff on Netflix and YouTube, and they're more interested in going to festivals and spending a fortune than they are going to a regular gig week in, week out. And I don't know. I mean, you only to see the scene at the moment in Ireland. Half the bands that are going in Ireland are bands that were going around in the 80s that have made comebacks. Your Aslans, your Something Happens, your the Stunning, people like this. Because there is no other bands with the talent and the songs coming through. Personally, I'm very depressed about the music scene, you know. Cry Before Dawn were a fantastic band from Wexford. They couldn't make it. I mean, there were some fantastic bands back then, and you don't see that anymore. You know?
Okay, well, thanks very much, Martin.
Cheers.
That was great.
You have to edit it down, cut out half it.
What?
Cut out half it, I said.
No,
I got carried away at points.
I wasn't expecting all of that. That
Yeah.
was really interesting just to get the insight into the music and how
Yeah.
I didn't know you had that, that kind of track record. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's loads of other stories I could tell you and things behind it, but